Welcome to a place where silence breaks, where forgotten passion awakens, and where love proves it has no age. Here we dive into stories that bare the soul, the quiet ache of years without touch, the electricity of a forbidden closeness, the surrender to longing that unravels every wall, and the raw truth of deep love where intimacy becomes rebirth. These aren't just stories, they are confessions of the heart, whispered in the voice of experience, soaked in vulnerability, tenderness, and fire. Each word carries the weight of rediscovery. Each moment reveals that desire never dies, it only waits. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever believed passion was over, these stories will remind you that it's not. Love is still alive, desire still burns, and here you'll feel it awaken. The quiet ache of years without touch is something that burrows deep inside. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it doesn't even show itself on the surface. It sits there, quietly draining life of its color. Days pass normally, routines fill the hours, conversations with neighbors, with family, with strangers in grocery aisles, all unfold as if nothing is missing. But when the door shuts at night, when the house becomes too still, the silence grows heavy. There is no hand reaching across the bed, no warmth to press into. The sheets are cool, untouched, as if waiting for something that never comes. It is in those moments when the mind whispers cruel lies. Passion belongs to youth, desire is a game for those untouched by years. The body becomes like a stranger. Once it had been alive, quick to respond to a touch, eager to feel warmth against warmth. Now it seemed quiet, half asleep, convinced it no longer mattered. Loneliness crept in like fog, so soft at first that it seemed harmless, until one day it was everywhere, covering everything, and then, without warning, came a gaze. Not just a look, but something sharper, something that pierced straight through the walls built by years of silence. Younger eyes, filled with a kind of boldness that was both terrifying and irresistible, held me in place. It wasn't casual, it wasn't polite. It was curious, intent, unafraid, and in that moment something stirred. Something long forgotten moved deep inside, almost painfully, like a locked door creaking open after decades. That gaze did not just see, it stripped away the layers of time, the excuses, the self-convincing stories told to survive the silence. It saw through all of it and lingered on what was still alive beneath. And the body, once convinced it had turned to stone, suddenly remembered. The heart beat quicker, the skin felt too tight, the breath caught without reason. A hunger that had been sleeping for years began to rise, unsteady at first, then stronger, undeniable. It wasn't about the age, it wasn't about the difference that should have made it impossible. It was about recognition, to be seen not as fading, not as invisible, but as whole, as alive, as wanted. The shame that had lived like a shadow started to crumble. That simple gaze broke something open that loneliness had tried to bury. The first brush of closeness came unexpected, a hand grazing mine, a gesture small enough to be dismissed, yet it left a trail of fire running up the arm. Every nerve screamed awake, every forgotten part of the body demanded to be noticed again. The quiet ache that had lived for so long was suddenly challenged. It no longer felt like an accepted truth. It felt like a wound that could be healed. Nights that had been endless and empty were suddenly filled with thoughts, restless, dangerous thoughts. How would it feel to be touched again, to be kissed, to be wanted without restraint? How could something so simple as a gaze unlock desires that had been locked away for decades? And why did it feel like drowning and breathing at the same time? The silence at night was no longer the same. It was no longer heavy and hopeless. It was charged, alive with memory, with anticipation, with need. The sheets felt different now, no longer just cold reminders of emptiness, but invitations, waiting for warmth, waiting for something more. Time seemed to blur. The days between glances stretched like threads pulled too tight, and each stolen moment of closeness became something sacred. A voice in the mind still tried to whisper, "This is wrong. This cannot last. Desire is not meant for you anymore." But the body argued louder now. The heart argued louder, and each time those eyes found mine, the arguments ended. There is a moment when walls collapse, not slowly, not in stages, but all at once, when defenses built over years are torn down by something undeniable. That moment came, not with words, but with a touch that lingered too long, with breath that came too close. That was the moment the soul admitted the truth. Love had not died, passion had not disappeared, and the quiet ache had only been waiting for the right fire to awaken it. The illusion shattered. Passion was not only for the young. It was not gone. It was here, raw and alive, demanding to be felt. And for the first time in years, the silence of the night was broken not by loneliness, but by the sound of a heart beating wildly against another's. It happened in a way that felt almost accidental, yet nothing about it was ordinary. A fingertip brushing against mine, a fleeting contact so delicate it could have been ignored, dismissed as chance. But it wasn't chance. That single touch carried with it something that stole the breath, something that spread like lightning through every vein, setting fire to places that had been cold for years. There had been glances before, subtle exchanges that lingered too long, words spoken with a softness that carried weight beneath them. But this was different. This was contact, real, undeniable. The moment our skin met, the air thickened, as if the world itself paused to watch. My heart leapt, startled by the intensity of it, a beat so violent it echoed in my ears. The warmth of that touch lingered, burning even after the hand had pulled away. What was awakened in me felt dangerous, forbidden, yet impossibly alive. A fire surged where there had been only ash, where years of silence and self-denial had convinced me that the body had grown numb. It wasn't numb, it was waiting, and that brush of fingertip, innocent to anyone watching, was a spark that set everything ablaze. Every doubt that had haunted me began to tremble in the presence of that fire. Doubt that whispered about age, about time, about being undesired. Doubt that told me love belonged to the past. One touch, and it all began to vanish, burned away in the intensity of what stirred between us. It became impossible to look at him without remembering the warmth of that touch. My hand would ache in silence, craving it again, imagining what more might feel like. The simple thought of closeness sent shivers racing across my skin. Nights that had been spent in hollow quiet were suddenly restless, filled with a hunger I hadn't known in years. Sleep came late, if at all, interrupted by the memory of that moment, replaying over and over until I could feel it even in my dreams. And when our hands found each other again, whether by chance or by the pull of something greater, the electricity was stronger. Fingers lingered this time, curling slightly, as if afraid to let go. Breath caught between us, and in that shared silence I could feel everything: desire, fear, longing, surrender. It was in that fragile contact that age disappeared. There was no number, no past, no future. There was only heat, only need, only the undeniable truth that bodies recognize each other long before words dare to. The fire did not ask permission. It consumed. Every look, every smile, every accidental brush of shoulders or arms only fed it more. I could feel my defenses crumble, the walls I had built for so long to keep loneliness from swallowing me whole. They fell easily like paper in the wind against the strength of his nearness. The forbidden closeness became the only place I wanted to exist, a space where I felt alive in ways I had forgotten were possible. It wasn't just lust, though the hunger burned fiercely. It was something deeper, something that made me tremble with both fear and anticipation. To be touched again, truly touched, was not just about skin. It was about being seen, being wanted, being reminded that desire does not die with time. It waits, patient and silent, until someone dares to awaken it. The brush of his hand against mine became the beginning of everything, a signal that what I thought was buried was still here, waiting, and though my mind fought, reminding me of years, of what others might think, my body refused to listen. My heart refused to listen. Every doubt melted when I remembered the way his fingers had lingered against mine, the way that touch had spoken louder than any words could. It was in that moment I knew something had changed forever. The silence I had carried inside for years would never return to what it once was. The fire was awake now, and it demanded to be felt. And in that fire, I discovered that desire has no age, no rules, no boundaries. It only knows the truth of what it wants. There comes a moment when the body stops fighting and begins to surrender, when the fear that has kept everything locked away for years finally gives in to the pull of longing. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated. It was something that happened in the heat of closeness, in the unspoken language of two people who could no longer resist what was rising between them. The first kiss was hesitant, almost questioning, yet behind it lived a hunger that had been waiting too long. And the second kiss, deeper, fuller, was nothing short of rediscovery. It felt like finding a forgotten piece of myself in the warmth of his mouth against mine, in the way his breath tangled with my own. Every kiss peeled back another layer, another wall built over decades of silence and denial. For years I had carried an armor of restraint, convincing myself that the need to be touched, to be desired, belonged to another lifetime. But in his kiss, all of that armor broke apart. Every touch he gave unraveled me further, until there was nothing left but true, raw, desperate, undeniable truth. The way his lips pressed against mine was not polite, not rehearsed, not restrained. It was hungry. It was the hunger of youth meeting the longing of years, and together they burned. His hands searched with urgency, not to claim, but to remind. Every curve, every line of me remembered under his touch that I was still alive, still wanted, still worthy of being desired with intensity. I trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant to feel again. It had been so long since my body had been more than a shell carrying me through life. Now it woke in ways I thought were gone forever. His fingers against my skin were fire, tracing paths that reignited every nerve, making me gasp at how easily he tore down barriers I thought were permanent. I found myself giving in, not carefully, not cautiously, but fully, surrendering to the tide of it. Every kiss was a rediscovery, as if I were learning myself all over again through him. The softness of his lips, the roughness of his breath, the urgency in the way he pulled me closer. It all reminded me that desire is not something that fades, it only waits. It waits for the moment it is welcomed back, for the courage to surrender to it, and once it is unleashed, it is unstoppable. The walls I had built over decades, walls of shame, of doubt, of fear of judgment, crumbled with each touch. His hands didn't just explore, they demanded that I remember what it meant to be wanted, not in passing, not as a memory, but in this moment, here and now. The body does not lie. It answered every kiss, every touch, with a hunger of its own, as though it had been starving and finally found the feast it longed for. I could taste freedom in those kisses, freedom from silence, freedom from the prison of believing passion was over. His mouth on mine was more than intimacy. It was resurrection. I felt my breath come faster, my heart race wilder, my skin burn hotter than it had in years, and I realized I wasn't just being kissed, I was being brought back to life. The surrender wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. It was the release of years of loneliness, the collapse of years of pretending I didn't need what every human longs for, to be touched with hunger, to be wanted so deeply that nothing else exists in that moment. Every kiss reminded me that my story wasn't over, that the body remembers even when the mind tries to forget. To feel wanted not politely, not gently, but hungrily, it is a shock and a gift. There was nothing casual in the way he held me, nothing restrained in the way he pressed closer. His desire stripped away doubt, his hunger silenced fear. In his arms, in the surrender to his touch, I was not 58 or fragile or forgotten. I was timeless, I was alive, I was burning, and in that fire, in that surrender, I found the truth I had been missing for so long. The body remembers, the heart remembers, and when love and desire collide, it is never too late to be consumed by it. There is a truth that only reveals itself in the quiet after two souls finally surrender to each other. It is not in the rush of passion, not in the hunger of bodies pressing close, but in the silence that follows, when everything feels different, when something sacred has been touched. What I discovered was that sex was never meant to be just skin against skin, a collision of desire without meaning. It was a rebirth, a rediscovery of everything I thought had been lost with time. For years, the idea of being touched that way seemed distant, almost impossible. The body had grown quiet, hidden behind layers of routine and solitude, forgotten like a book gathering dust. Desire had seemed like a memory, something that belonged to another lifetime, something that could never return. And then suddenly, it was here, awake, demanding, undeniable. It began with the first kiss that lingered too long, with the first touch that burned too deeply, but it did not stop there. It grew into something I could not have imagined, something that shattered the loneliness I had carried for so long. When his body pressed against mine for the first time, it was not just closeness, it was recognition. The warmth of his skin, the weight of his breath, the urgency in the way his hands moved, all of it told me what words never could. That I was still alive, still wanted, still capable of being consumed by love. It wasn't polite, it wasn't measured, it was raw and tender all at once. Vulnerability filled the room, mingling with passion until they became indistinguishable. I trembled, not because I was afraid, but because every nerve in me was remembering what it had forgotten. His touch was not just pleasure, it was proof that desire does not die, it only waits, proof that beneath the years, beneath the doubts, the soul still longs to be touched in ways that make it feel whole. Each kiss felt like a revelation, each movement like a promise, each gasp like a prayer whispered in the dark. The vulnerability of it was overwhelming. To let myself be seen so completely, to be touched where I had grown used to silence, to open myself without hesitation, it was frightening and liberating at once. My body, which I had thought of as something quiet, something unnoticed, came alive in his arms. It responded with a hunger that startled me, with a tenderness that softened me. It was not about proving anything, not about reclaiming youth, but about embracing the truth of this moment, this connection, this love. There was passion, yes, fierce and unrelenting, but within it lived something even deeper, a tenderness that wrapped itself around every movement, a gentleness that made the fire feel safe. It was not just the rhythm of bodies, it was the rhythm of hearts beating together, giving and taking in equal measure. The way his hands held me, the way his eyes found mine even in the heat of it, made every second feel eternal. I had thought desire was gone. I had thought love belonged to another part of my life. But in that sacred closeness, in the joining of skin and soul, I learned how wrong I had been. Desire had never died. It had only been waiting quietly, patiently for the right moment, the right touch, the right person to awaken it again. And when it awakened, it was not fragile. It was powerful, unstoppable, undeniable. When it was over, when breath was heavy and the fire softened into warmth, I felt something I had not felt in decades, whole, complete, alive in a way that words can never fully capture. It was not just sex, not just passion, not just closeness. It was rebirth. A sacred reminder that love and desire belong to every age, to every soul willing to surrender to them. And in that raw truth, I understood at last that desire never dies. It only waits for the right moment to return. Thank you for sharing this journey of raw emotion and rediscovery. If these words touched you, if they stirred something deep within, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories waiting, stories of passion, of vulnerability, of deep love that proves it's never too late. Until next time, hold on to the fire that reminds you, you are still alive and desire never dies.